Good evening, everyone. It's another great night here at Oldham Lane, and I'm glad to see everyone here tonight as we study the Word of God. I'm going to take tonight's passage from Luke chapter 15. I'm going to primarily be in that passage, although we'll reference some others along the way. Most of you know the story. Most of you have been to any type of religious gathering, know the story of the prodigal son. It's a pretty popular story. But suppose somebody rewrote this parable. Imagine he's like a modern psychologist, somebody like a Dr. Spock. In that case, some might say that, or that person might say that the prodigal left home because the father oppressed him, or he was sheltered from life by his overly protective mother and the poor financial prospects and a profit-driven society. Or some might blame it on the president, who should have provided more programs to occupy troubled teens and young men. Others could argue that the rabbis were not strict enough, or that the boy was forced to go to the synagogue every Saturday, and now he's rebelling. But Jesus doesn't start off the story that way. There's no blame for why the prodigal decided to leave. The son, despite his father's goodness, made a choice. It was that simple, and sometimes that's what happens today. We all have wills of our own. We all make choices. But what this story is about, it's about the coming back. It's not about why he left. It's about the coming back and the process that comes in both the son, the father, and the older brother. Now, you have to take this in the context of the bigger story that's going on in the midst of this. In Luke chapter 15, verses 1 and 2, it tells that this is the beginning of a trilogy of stories, but this story even goes further. Sometimes we stop at the end of the prodigal, and if you keep reading, you read the context of it, it actually goes all the way into chapter 17, that this is a long conversation that Jesus had regarding those who are lost and how we are to treat one another and those who are coming back. And chapter 15, verses 1 and 2, it says, "Now the tax collectors and sinners were all drawing near to him." They were coming to Jesus. Why were they coming to Jesus? Because his message of hope was down to them. He was one who spoke with authority, and he was going out to them and reaching out to them, so they also drew near to him. And the Pharisees and the scribes grumbled, saying, "This man receives sinners and eats with them." They were very upset that this man who was supposed to be a rabbi was entertaining sinners, and that they would dine with him. Does he not know that they're unclean? Does he not know that they are the type of people who they are? And Jesus says, that's not what this is about. And so he begins a trilogy of stories. He goes into a story of the lost sheep. He goes into a story of the lost coin. And then finally he gets to the story of the lost son, or the prodigal son, as some people address this. But the great news is, because of this story, we see that God welcomes even the worst sinner. He begins off the story in verse 11, says, "And he said, there was a man who had 2 sons. And the younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of the property that is coming to me.' And he divided his property between them." Now this story, this parable, begins with a younger son who demands his inheritance from his father. This is a highly disrespectful act in this culture. The use of there's an imperative form in the Greek there when it says to give. And it emphasizes his son's audacity and his rebellion. And this request is significant. Because it's in the imperative form, it can be seen as a command. Give me my inheritance. Indicating a disrespectful and demanding attitude towards the father. This mirrors church members that turn away from God. They choose to turn away from God. They want his gifts. They want the benefits that come from a gathering of people, but not his presence. They want the blessings that come of being under the protection of God, his gifts that come down, but they don't want the relationship. This is a way of staying by the streams of water, but not partaking in the fruits thereof. Like Psalms chapter 1, verse 3, you see the contrast between a person who walks in the counsel of sinners, and you see the person who stands by the streams. They want to partake in the fruits, but they don't want to get rid of the counsel of sinners. They want to be both in the world and out of the world. And Jesus, I think, is saying you can't be one or the other. You have to be able to be in the relationship to get those. But this son, according to the Mosaic law in Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 17, the younger son will receive 1/3 of the estate, while the older son should receive 2/3 of the estate. He should receive the double portion. So if there had been 3 sons, he would have gotten half of the estate, and each of the sons would have gotten a quarter, and so on. Deuteronomy 21:17, he shall acknowledge the firstborn, the son of the unloved, by giving him a double portion of all that he has, for he is the first fruits of his strength. The right of the firstborn is his. Now, there's also a contrast between this story and those first 2 stories. The first 2 stories tell the story of some people of meager means, of humble beginnings. You see a shepherd who is taking care of his flock. But now this is somebody who's actually saying he's a good shepherd. He's going to go after the one and in relationship to and leave the 99 behind. This is a young bride to be who's lost one of her marriage coins or dowry coins, and she goes and she needs all 10. She can't just pull another coin out of a large estate and pull it into there because she has plenty. She needs all 10 to be a part of that dowry. But this word for estate, this man, this father, he has property and he has wealth. He has enough property that he can divide his estate 3 ways and still have plenty to have an estate going on. This is a contrast between these parables that we see going on here. The difference between a prophet going after them and the Father in heaven who wants to be in that. Now, in the midst of this, we see that this young man, he has rebelled against them. And we begin reading in verse 13, says, "Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had, and he took a journey into a far country. And there he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens in that country, who sent him into his fields to feed pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. He takes his inheritance, and it says he spends it on reckless living. Eventually, he hits rock bottom." Now, it says there's a couple of things in the midst of this passage. The far country represents a separation from God. And his reckless living, sometimes we assume he's gone out and he's done horrible things. But the word here that Jesus uses just literally means living unsavingly. He means he lived wastefully. He went out. It doesn't say that he used it all in sin. We see that from the older brother, and we assume that that's what he did. But he just didn't live wisely. He lived apart from God, and he chose to live unwisely. It is not necessarily the story that we see here that he was living in a full and reckless abandonment of sin, and he was going out and he was having horrendous parties. He wasn't wise with his money. He hadn't grown up yet. And because he didn't have the wisdom of the Father anymore, he is now in a different point. Now, the Jewish audience also heard pigs and a pig farmer, and that he was willing to do that. Now, that means that he is going to a citizen of the far country. Doesn't mean it's just far away. It just means somebody that's different than us. It could have been as far away as Egypt, because that's where these carob pods are growing, or Syria, but not Israel anymore. We know that he's under Israel law, Mosaic law, because he's following after that principle of Deuteronomy chapter 21, but he is living far away. And they know that this is a citizen of a far country. And by attaching himself to a citizen of a far country, he has become like one of them. He is now not only disrespected his father and chosen to go away, but he's now saying, I am one of them, by attaching himself to that citizen of a far country. And he is in complete rebellion. Those carob pods that he says that he wished he would eat, are something of, they're kind of like a substitute for chocolate. Until I was studying this, I didn't realize this, but it's just kind of a substitute for chocolate in that it doesn't have the caffeine, and that it doesn't have the things that are dangerous to animals. The reason that dogs can't eat it is because that theramine that's in chocolate. Well, this carob pods kind of taste like it, and they use it to fatten up animals, but it has little nutritional value. The son being willing to eat this means I just need something. I just need something to make it through to the end of the day. They're used for fattening up animals, but for humans, they just don't work. But even this was not considered worthy for him. And he realized that he needed to come back. That even his servants, even the slaves in his father's house, have it better than him. In verse 17 we read, but when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants had more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. He recognizes his sin. He recognizes the rebellion that he had done with his father. He returns home, but he's prepared to accept the role that he probably deserves. He had forfeited his inheritance by taking it early. He says, I'm not worthy because I had already accepted my inheritance, and my inheritance is already spent. So I am no longer a son. I come into your house, and I just want to work for wages. I want to be one of the servants in your household, because I know that you treat your servants better than this servant that I was over here. I was on this side. I was the citizen. I was attached to the citizen of a far country, and they treated me with complete disrespect. That I didn't have enough to eat. But I know that you are a good master, and that you treat your servants well. And I want to be a part of that community, because that community is even better than what I see over there. He says all this, and then he gets up and he goes. So it reminds me of the confession that we see in Psalm 51 of David. After David had sinned with Bathsheba, he comes and we see him write this repentant psalm in Psalm 51. In verse 4, he says, against you and you only have I sinned, and done what is evil in your sight, so that you may be justified in your words and blameless in your judgment. God, take and make me one of your servants again. He calls for the Father to be at peace with him and to take him back. And in verse 20, it says, and he arose and he went to his father. But while they were still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion. He ran, embraced him, and kissed him. The father's response is one of extraordinary love and forgiveness. When the son returns, the father sees him from a distance. He was watching for him. He was hoping for the day that his son may come back. He saw him off in the distance while he was still a long way off. And then he comes and he embraces him before he can even finish his apology. He doesn't even need to say a word. He ran and he embraced him as a son. He showed compassion. He felt compassion for his son because he loved him. It didn't matter that his son had dishonored him. It didn't matter that what was everything that had gone on in the past. And even before he even makes it to him, we see him running. This is both the running and the embracing says, I'm willing to do anything for you, son, because running for an elderly man would have been considered dishonorable. And he does that, and he embraces him, somebody that has been in the midst of the pig farm. He knows he's unclean, and he still embraces him. God is eager to welcome the repentant sinners. He is willing to take them in no matter what, because they come in and they are willing to change. He wants to welcome them in. He was watching and waiting for the day that his son would arrive. And when that day came, he didn't want to wait one moment longer. One moment longer without his son was too much. He ran in celebration of the son returning to him. The father's immediate and compassionate response is crucial. The Greek word here means to have compassion or to be moved with pity. It highlights the father's deep emotional response. This wasn't just a, hey, I want to be a part of this again because I want to bring honor back to my family that my son is restored. This wasn't about that. This was, I need this son, and I'm so glad that he's back to me. And the son called, and the son said to him in verse 21, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring the fattened calf and kill it. Then let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. The father orders the best robe, a ring signifying he now has the authority of the father again, sandals for his son because he came in barefoot and destitute. It symbolizes his complete restoration as a son, not the servant that the son is asking to be. It illustrates there is no such thing in the kingdom of God as being barely loved or barely forgiven. I come in either fully forgiven or not at all. If I stand outside the doors and refuse to come into the kingdom of God, I have nothing. But if I walk in the doors and ask forgiveness, the blood of Christ covers all. It doesn't just cover the things that we're willing to admit to. We have to confess. And we have to be willing to say, this is what I did, like the prodigal son did, because those are deep things. But Christ's blood covers it all. He calls on them to celebrate. That's a reinstatement as a family member. The fattened calf represents a special occasion. It's like the feast in 15:6, where it says, and when he comes home, he calls together his friends and his neighbors, saying to them, rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep that was lost. Or in 15:9, where it says, and when she found it, she calls together her friends and neighbors, saying, rejoice with me, for I have found the coin that I have lost. Jesus says every time these lost are called together, their lost are coming back, there's a celebration. This is not a light celebration. This is a big deal that the son has come home. The celebration signifies that he has a right place in his family and the joy that comes with it. Is this not the greatest day of your life when you realize the salvation of God? You may say, some people would say that they remember the day that their kids are born. They remember the day that their bride walked down the aisle to them. But is the day that you realize Jesus, that should be the greatest day of your life, because that's the day that heaven is rejoicing for, because you came back and you are married to God, that you are his bride, and that you are willing to be in there. It says in verse 7, just so I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. In verse 10, he says, just so I tell you, there is joy before the angels of God over one sinner who repents. And the Father says here in verse 24, for this my son was dead. He was dead to him, but he's alive again. He was lost, and he is found. And they began to celebrate. The Father conveys that this was a moment of celebration because the Son has come back to the Father. The robe, the sandals, and the ring, they all symbolize complete restoration to the sonship. It echoes passages like Zechariah chapter 3, verse 4, where God clothes his people in righteousness. It says in Zechariah chapter 3, verse 4, and the angel said to those who were standing before him, remove the filthy garments from him. And to him he said, behold, I have taken your iniquity away from you, and I will clothe you with pure vestments. There's celebration because of the Son coming back. But the only problem is, not everyone celebrated. And Jesus specifically mentions this older brother. In verse 25, now his older son was in the field, and he came and he drew near to the house. He heard music and dancing, and he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has received him back safe and sound. But he was angry, and he refused to go in. His father came out, and he entreated to him. The older brother stayed behind. He took care of the estate. He was faithful and obedient. The father even acknowledges, everything that I've had was yours, and you have done well. But the older brother reacts with anger and resentment because the brother has returned. The older brother feels that his father's actions are unfair and that he is the one that deserves the better treatment because he is the one that was obedient. The elder son is the mirror of the Pharisees' attitude towards Jesus welcoming sinners that we see in Luke 15:2. His refusal to join the celebration contrasts with the joy in heaven over the one repentant sinner. It says in verse 29, but he answered his father, look, these many years I have served you, and I never disobeyed your command, yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him. This attitude is the same as saying, mercy for me, but not for thee. It highlights the danger of self-righteousness and the lack of understanding of the Father's grace. He also adds facts to the story. We'd only know that he was in wasteful living, but all of a sudden we see him adding that he had spent his time with prostitutes in the midst of that community. I don't know whether those are actual details to the story, or if he'd heard rumors, or if he just assumed, or if he had sent somebody to spy on him. But in any case, he's just resentful of the brother's new status. He even refuses to call him brother. Notice what he calls him. He calls him this son of yours. That's like when the kids are misbehaving. This child of yours has decided to misbehave today. He's your kid today. And he says, this is your son. He's not my brother anymore. He's your son. And he has come back, and you chose to welcome him back. And the older brother's refusal to join the celebration is a mirror of the Pharisees' attitude towards Jesus' ministry. They fail to see that grace isn't about the good things you've done. It's freely given of God for all that ask for it. The older son reveals his misunderstanding of grace and his focus on works and merit, that I can earn my way into the Father's grace. But the Father loves the Son no matter what. He just wants him to admit that you are my son. And this son sees his relationship with his Father as transactional rather than relational. And if your relationship is transactional with God, you're in a dangerous position, because a transactional view with God mitigates his sovereignty and grace. It reduces God to a being who can be manipulated. That if I say the right words, if I do the right things, then I can be in God's grace. But he is sovereign alone, and his grace is free to all. It puts you in a place where you have to manage expectations versus reality. When prayers or actions do not yield the expected result, this is like a prosperity gospel situation where I believe that if I have enough faith, I can get whatever I want. And that's not what God says. It says individuals that then experience that breach of trust, they get, well, did I not have enough faith? Did I not pray hard enough? Did I not give enough? Did I not do the right things? That has nothing to do with it. Sometimes God's answer is just no, or not right now, because he sees the entire picture. And that results in, if you misunderstand that can result in you questioning God's faithfulness in your life and even abandoning the faith altogether. It also shows a lack of depth in your relationship. If you're a transactional approach, it limits the depth of your relationship with God, because he can only provide materially or circumstantially. So only if then statements happen. He can provide materially for you, but he can't provide the peace that comes, because the peace only comes with a relationship. And that peace is much more valuable than the material things. It fails to recognize the intrinsic value of knowing God himself beyond his gifts and his blessings. And then finally, this is probably the most dangerous one, but transactional faith often leads to worship and service that's motivated by personal gain rather than genuine love for God. It distorts the purpose of worship, turning it into a means to an end rather than expression devotion. If the song leader gets up and he doesn't sing the songs that you like, then is that a self-centered worship, or is that a God-centered worship? Because the song wasn't sung to you. The song was sung to God. If the worship service goes a little bit long and you're not quite at the front of the line of your favorite restaurant, is it about you and the transaction that you have with God, or is it about the time that I spent in fellowship with my brothers and sisters, that I can spend time in worship with God? Is it if the middle of the month becomes a little long for you, and your paycheck starts to run out closer to the end of the month, and I say, God, what are you doing here? I need this to be able to do what I'm supposed to do. Is that about yourself, or is that about God? God has a response to that older brother. In verse 31, he says, and he said to him, Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found. The Father's love is not limited. It extends to both sons, regardless of their actions. The Father reassures the older son by saying, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. The Father affirms his place in the family and addresses any feelings of neglect or insecurity. He still consoles the older son, even though Jesus is definitely telling the story as a slant that the older son is the one in the wrong here at the end of the story. God says that you're my son too, and I want you to be a part of this community just as much as anybody else, but you have to address the issue. Because if you believe that you have addressed the self-righteousness and pride in your life, then that probably means that it's just as glaring as ever. Because the moment that you believe that pride has been addressed in your life, that probably means that it's there more than ever, because it was about you and the way that you addressed it. The Father challenges self-righteous individuals within the church to recognize that God's grace is not earned through deeds or adherence to rules. It's freely given, and because of that free grace and that compassion, we want to be a part of the kingdom. We want to do what He asks us to do. He wants us to be the son that is obedient, but not because we need the good things, but because we want to be with the Father. It encourages humility and gratitude rather than entitlement. Parables such as this one are just natural stories with a spiritual meaning, designed to draw us into the hidden nature and the hidden truths of God's kingdom. This one reminds us to have the heart of Christ, who, according to Philippians 2, did not account equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied Himself by taking the form of a servant in the likeness of men. Remember that grace is not something to be earned, but freely offered and treasured as a child of God. If you want to be able to partake of that grace, if you want to learn more about that, you are welcome to come and see any of us, whether it's elders or the minister staff. Come and see us. We want to teach you, and we want to help you through those things. If you believe you may be one of the prodigal sons and you want to come back, or if you may believe that you're the older brother and you'd help addressing those, we'd love to pray with you and be with you in the journey, whichever it is. But if you want to come now is your time to come as we stand and sing.